He called me garbage with the same mouth that used to ask me for lunch money. He said it slow, like he wanted the word to land and stick, garbage. Then he pointed to the door of the house I paid off one winter at a time and said, "Get out." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It was Friday, November 6th, Cleveland rain coming in sideways, tapping the porch light like impatient fingers. My son, Ethan, stood in my kitchen, wearing a fresh-cut fade and a jacket too expensive for a man who's never scraped paint off a floor. His girlfriend, Tina, leaned against the fridge, taking little sips of my coffee, the blue mug my wife used to hold. "We're modernizing," he said, flipping a slick brochure onto the table. "This place is dead equity, Dad. I can rent it for triple by December." I told him this house was my retirement. I told him every shingle on the roof remembered my hands. He shrugged like I'd told him the weather. "You can stay a week, or you can make it easy and leave now." Then he smiled at Tina and added, "He hates change." When I reached for the deed folder in the drawer, he laughed. "You don't own anything anymore." He said it so casually, I almost missed the knife inside the words. I felt my face go hot. The folder felt light in my hands, and for a second I wondered if grief makes paper thinner. Tina rolled her eyes and tapped her phone. "Keys, Ethan." He didn't wait. He walked to the front door, twisted the deadbolt, and with a little metal click I'd heard 1,000 times, my home stopped, recognizing me. "New lock's going on tonight," he said, setting a brass key on the table like a prop. "You're welcome to keep that one for your memories." I didn't shout. Men like me learn early that shouting wastes air you need for work. I took my jacket from the chair, the one with the left cuff frayed from leaning over the bench grinder, and I stepped onto the porch with my duffel. The rain hit me just hard enough to make my eyes sting. Behind me, I heard Tina whisper, "We'll stage it Sunday," and Ethan answer, "Finally." I sat in my truck at the curb, the cab smelling like machine oil in winter. At 9:43 p.m., my phone buzzed, an alert from Lakeview Credit Union, $12,800 withdrawn from my checking counter authorization. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I texted him, "What is this?" He replied at 9:47, "My money now." "Stop clinging, it's pathetic." Then 4 dots, another message, "You're garbage. Get out before I call the cops." I saved the thread. Maybe I knew even then what proof feels like in your hands. Heavy and cold, the heater coughed to life. I watched the porch light through a weak halo on the wet steps. Through the window I could see my wife's photo still hanging over the hall table, the one from before chemo, when her hair was thick and her eyes looked like they believed in me. I wondered what she'd say if she could see our boy dressed in arrogance and somebody else's opinions. By midnight, the rain softened to a steady hiss. I folded my coat under my head and tried to sleep. Every minute stretched like old rubber. Somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m., I remembered the porch camera I installed after a package went missing last Christmas, the kind that saves to an SD card tucked behind the trim. Ethan hadn't thought of that. He never did like screws he couldn't see. At 2:18 a.m., I wrote 3 words on the back of a gas receipt with a dull pencil I keep in the truck. "Get it back." The paper tore a little under the pressure. I slipped it into my wallet, turned the key to warm the cab again, and watched my own breath fade from the glass. He changed the locks. He thought that meant I had no way in. He was wrong. The law has keys he's never learned to fear. Morning came grey and thin. Frost edged the windshield like a slow infection of light. I'd slept maybe an hour. My back ached from the seatbelt buckle digging into my shoulder. Cleveland in November doesn't forgive nights spent in old trucks. I started the engine just to feel warmth crawl through the vents. The house across the street, the one I'd built board by board, glowed soft and golden through the curtains. My curtains, my home. I watched Ethan's shadow move through the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, probably talking to Tina about renovations. Then through the window, I saw something small that almost broke me. He'd left the photo of his mother on the counter, face down. Around 8 a.m., I drove to the gas station off Lorraine Avenue, bought a burnt cup of coffee and a stale muffin, the kind Ellen used to call air in paper form. The clerk handed me the change and said, "Rough night, huh?" I just nodded. My hands were shaking so badly, the coins rattled. I parked at Edgewater Park and tried to call Ethan again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text. You don't mean this. Come home, son. No reply. Only the silence of a phone that had decided I was a stranger. Around noon, I dozed off to the sound of lake waves slapping the rocks. When I woke, my phone showed a notification from Zillow. Someone had listed my address for short-term rental. Photos of the living room I'd built, the porch where I'd taught him how to fix a bike chain. Caption, modern cozy family home, available for immediate stay. $220 a night. That was the moment I broke. I sat there staring until the screen dimmed itself. Then I hit the steering wheel hard enough to set off the horn. A couple walking their dog looked over. I pretended to sneeze. My chest felt hollow, like something essential had been vacuumed out. At 2:43 p.m., Maria Lopez knocked on the truck window. She was my neighbor for 20 years, the kind of woman who baked extra bread just in case. She frowned when she saw my duffel bag in the back seat. "Rob, what on earth are you doing sleeping out here?" "Just getting some air," I muttered. She didn't buy it. "He kicked you out, didn't he?" Her tone was soft but sharp. I didn't answer. She sighed, handed me a thermos. "Soup, chicken noodle. Eat something before pride kills you." When she walked back to her porch, I stared at the thermos for a long time. It was still warm. For some reason, that small kindness hit harder than all the insults. By 4 p.m., I drove to Lakeview Credit Union. Inside, the place smelled of coffee and printer toner. My banker, a young guy named Kyle, greeted me with the same cheerful politeness he probably used for everyone. But his smile faded when he pulled up my account. "Mr. Hall, did you authorize these transfers?" He turned the monitor toward me. 2 withdrawals, one for $2,800, another for $8,600, both marked as mobile authorization. "No," I said quietly. "My son must have—" Kyle's expression tightened. "Then this is fraud. You'll need to file immediately. I'll flag the account." He printed a form and slid it across. The date read Nov/7/2025. I stared at my own name, typed beside the word victim. I'd been called a lot of things in my life: worker, husband, father, but never that. When I walked out, snow had started to fall in small, uncertain flakes. I sat in the truck, watching them hit the windshield and melt. Somewhere inside, humiliation turned into a kind of cold focus. At home, no, his house, now, the lights flickered on. Through the window, I saw Ethan pacing in the living room, phone to his ear. I cracked the window to hear faint laughter. "Yeah, he's gone," he was saying. "Place will be cleared by the weekend." I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old SD card case, the one I used for my welding photos. Behind it, taped to the inside, was a small micro SD labeled Porch Cam. I'd installed that camera after the Amazon guy kept dropping packages in the flower bed. Ethan never knew where it was. I turned the card in my fingers. The label had faded, but the date printed on the side, 12/22/2023, was still clear. I'd replaced it last Christmas. It recorded everything straight to memory, everything. I realized then I didn't need to shout or beg or fight like a fool. I just needed to watch, document, and wait. The law loves dates, signatures, and silence. That night I parked a block away, across from Maria's house. She came out again around 7:30, waved and pointed to her porch light. "You can plug in there if you need heat," she mouthed. I smiled faintly, shook my head. "Not yet," I said under my breath, because somewhere between the falling snow and the hum of the truck engine, a new thought took shape. If my son wanted to see how cold the world could get, I'd let him. But I wouldn't use fists or fire. I'd use the one thing he thought an old man like me had lost: patience. The morning after the bank visit, the frost came thicker, a white film coating every car on West 112th. I sat in the truck watching people scrape windshields, thinking how easy it was for strangers to see effort and assume stability. From the street, I probably looked like a man warming up his engine before work. Nobody could tell my whole life was boxed in a duffel behind me. At 8:07 a.m., Maria knocked again. She didn't ask permission, just opened the passenger door and slid in, clutching a clipboard. I made a few calls, she said. My niece works with an attorney, elder law, property cases. She can help you. I almost told her no. Pride again. But the thermos from last night was still in my cup holder, and I hadn't earned the right to reject kindness twice. I nodded. By noon I was sitting in a small office downtown. The plaque on the wall read, Monroe and Associates, Estate, Trust and Elder Law. The place smelled of peppermint and legal pads. A woman with calm eyes and grey streaks in her hair stepped in. Mr. Hall, I'm Laura Monroe. She motioned me to sit and listened while I explained everything, the lockout, the forged withdrawals, the rental listing. When I finished, she leaned back, pen tapping lightly against her folder. Your son made a serious mistake, she said. He kicked out the legal owner. I blinked. Owner? She opened a public record on her screen and turned it toward me. There, under property deed, Cuyahoga County, my name glowed in black text. Robert A. Hall, full title holder. I stared at it like it was an X-ray of something I thought had been broken beyond repair. He told me he refinanced. He didn't, she said firmly. He tried, but your signature's still required. That's where he slipped up. She started writing fast. Here's what we do. We filed for a temporary restraining order under Ohio elder abuse statutes. You'll need evidence. The text where he called you garbage, the porch footage, and any financial discrepancies. We'll also file a writ of restitution to reclaim possession of the property. My head was spinning, but for the first time in days, I felt something other than shame. I felt traction. At 2:22 p.m., I drove back to the neighborhood. Ethan's truck wasn't there. I parked 2 houses down, popped the plastic trim off the porch column, and slid out the micro SD card. The cold metal bit my fingers, but I didn't care. Proof feels like oxygen when you've been suffocating in doubt. I stopped by Maria's afterward. She had soup again, this time thicker. How'd it go? She asked. She says I own everything. Maria smiled. Then make sure he learns what that means. That night I stayed at a small motel off Detroit Avenue, $61.50 cash. The receipt went straight into a folder labeled Ledger I'd started keeping. I copied down everything. Monroe told me, bank withdrawals, 2800, Plan 8600 locks changed, No V6, 9:40 p.m., witness, Maria Lopez, camera evidence, Nuvix lockout MP4, next appointment. Nov 12:10 a.m. I underlined the date twice until the pen tore through the paper. Later, lying on the motel bed, I remembered something Monroe had said. Elder law isn't about revenge, it's about correction. I rolled that word around in my head. Correction, not payback. Not spite, correction. On November 10th, I filed the first complaint at the courthouse. The clerk stamped the papers with a thud that sounded almost like closure. She slid the stamped copy back across the counter and said, "You'll get your hearing notice within a week." That same afternoon, Monroe called. "I checked county records," she said. "You still hold controlling interest in Hall & Sons LLC, the small property company you and your wife formed years ago?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yes, it's just paperwork now," she smiled through the phone. "Not quite. That LLC owns the deed to your son's apartment on Euclid Avenue. Legally, you're his landlord." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I started to laugh, a dry, tired sound that scared me with how real it felt. "So technically," I began. "Technically," she said, "you could serve him an eviction notice the same day he faces his own hearing." Outside, snow started falling again, slow and quiet. I stared at it through the motel window and whispered, "Ellen, I think I found the right kind of justice. Because sometimes revenge isn't about burning bridges. It's about showing the other person who built them in the first place." I closed my ledger that night on one new line, Nov 10. The law remembers names. By November 15th, I stopped feeling like a victim. The air still hurt to breathe, but now it carried purpose. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake in that tiny motel room, pour burnt coffee from the lobby pot, and open the blue folder Monroe gave me. She'd written one word on the cover in neat, slanted handwriting: evidence. Inside were copies of everything that mattered, my bank statements, screenshots of Ethan's texts, Maria's written affidavit, and 3 photos printed from the porch camera stills. In one, Ethan's hand gripped the doorframe mid-slam. In another, Tina stood smirking behind him. Proof was no longer a word. It was an object, ink, timestamps, and grainy pixels that couldn't lie. That morning, Monroe called. "I filed the TRO and petition for restitution," she said. "It'll take a week or 2 for the court to schedule, but the sheriff's office will serve notice before month's end." I took a long breath. "So he'll know?" "He'll know," she confirmed. "And you'll be ready." Ready. I hadn't felt that in a long time. I spent the next few days quietly rebuilding the case, like tightening bolts on an old machine. I drove to the Hall & Sons LLC office downtown. The receptionist, a kid who looked barely 20, blinked when he saw me. "Mr. Hall, I thought your son handled everything now." "He handles nothing," I said calmly, and asked for the last quarter's filings. When the papers came out of the printer, my name was still at the top as managing director. Ethan had never bothered updating the records. Arrogance really is the best accomplice to justice. Back at the motel, I spread the documents across the bed and began sorting them by date. The LLC's tax ID matched the ownership record on his condo. That meant every rent payment he'd made over the past year, every check, every online transfer, had legally gone to me. I smiled. "You've been paying your old man to live, son," I muttered. "You just didn't know it." On November 17th, Maria helped me collect witness statements from 2 more neighbors who saw Ethan change the locks. "Write exactly what you remember," I told them. "No drama, just truth." Both were happy to oblige. When Maria handed me the signed papers, she said, "He thought he could erase you, Rob, but you're carved into this street." That night I drove past the house. Through the window I saw strangers, tenants. A family of 4 eating dinner in my kitchen, laughter echoing off my walls. Ethan must have rented it through Airbnb, illegal sublet under city code. I took a photo of the listing from my phone, zooming in on the address tag. Another nail for the case. By November 20th, the file had grown thick. I bought a 3-inch binder from Staples, labeled it in block letters, Hall v. Hall, Evidence and Timeline. Inside, every page told a story, cold, factual, irrefutable. The kind of story courts love. Still, part of me struggled. At night, when the motel pipes rattled, I'd see Ethan as a boy, grease on his hands, proud of the birdhouse we built together. I'd hear him saying, "Someday, Dad, I'll build something bigger." Maybe he did. He built a lie so big, it needed the law to tear it down. On November 22nd, I met Monroe again. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee. She looked over the binder and nodded approvingly. "He's renting the property? Perfect. That violates zoning and your ownership rights. We'll add it to the filing." I asked her if I was doing the right thing. She leaned forward, eyes steady. "You're not destroying him. You're teaching him where ownership begins and where entitlement ends." When I left her office, the city felt different. The same streets that had once felt cold and hostile now looked like allies. Every streetlight a witness, every frost pattern a quiet nod. That evening, I stopped by St. Malachi's, sat in the back pew where Ellen used to sit. I didn't pray for victory. I just whispered, "Keep me steady." At 9:14 p.m., back in my motel room, I opened the binder one more time. I slipped a fresh page under the last divider and wrote across the top, "Next, prove pattern." Below it, 3 bullet points. Bank withdrawals. Forgery complaint. Airbnb listing. Zoning violation. Property deed TRO. Enforcement. Then I signed it like a craftsman finishing a blueprint. Robert A. Hall. I closed the binder gently and smiled for the first time in weeks. He took my house. He took my money. But I was taking back the ground under his feet. One page, one law, one quiet signature at a time. By the week of November 24th, the cold hit hard. Cleveland turned white overnight. Snow on the gutters. Frozen pipes groaning under old houses. I'd driven past my home twice that week without stopping, each time slower, each time wondering if Ethan ever thought about the man who built those walls with his bare hands. But I already knew the answer. The blue SUV parked in my old driveway wasn't his. It belonged to another short-term renter. Through the frosted windshield, I saw strangers inside, coffee mugs, laughter, the television flickering in my living room. I snapped 2 photos, each with a visible timestamp from my phone, and emailed them to Monroe. She replied 3 minutes later, "Perfect. Unauthorized rental confirmed. Keep collecting." That night, I sat in my truck, engine idling, watching my porch light blink on and off through the falling snow. Ethan had installed motion sensors, cheap ones. They kept flickering from passing cars. Every time they did, I imagined it was the house trying to talk to me, to say, "Hold on, I remember you." At 10:14 p.m., I scrolled through social media and found a video that made my stomach twist. Ethan, standing in that same living room, holding a drink, recording a TikTok with Tina beside him. The caption, "Old man finally out, new era begins." Her laughter echoed faintly in the background. Comments filled the screen, clapping emojis, "Upgrade." Messages. I read every one like a slow punch to the ribs. The next morning, I printed the post, screenshots and all. Paper beats pixels, that's what Monroe always said. By Thanksgiving week, things escalated. Maria called. "He's back," she whispered. "He's here right now, picking up mail off the porch." "That's fine," I said, calm. "Let him. You want me to film? No need." The porch cam's been running since the 16th. 2 hours later, I checked the feed. There he was, Ethan, glancing over his shoulder, reaching into the mailbox, pulling out envelopes with my name. I paused the video, zoomed in and captured the image. His face half-lit, hand mid-motion. Evidence of mail tampering. Another violation to tack onto the growing list. On November 29th, Monroe filed an amendment to our case. "Every petty act he commits," she said, "becomes another brick in your wall of proof. But with each victory, the loneliness hit deeper." I started counting time not by hours, but by case numbers, filings, affidavits. The motel room walls began to feel like pages closing in. Every night I'd read through the ledger I kept, making sure the story made sense, day by day, like a novel written in real time. Then came the first blowback. On December 2nd, Ethan posted another video, this time mocking me directly. "If you're watching, Dad," he sneered into the camera, "you're just mad you couldn't keep up. Some people are meant to fade out." His followers laughed. One comment read, "Boomer meltdown incoming." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, Monroe filed a defamation clause under our existing TRO. "He's using your name and likeness maliciously," she explained. "Courts love digital trails." A few days later, Ethan received a certified letter. The clerk's note said he accepted it personally, his signature shaky. That same evening, Maria texted me a photo. Ethan, standing in the yard, yelling into his phone, snow swirling around him. The caption, "Guess who got served?" For the first time in weeks, I laughed. Still, revenge wasn't joy, it was focus. The kind of focus I'd used welding steel beams in January cold. Steady hands, clear aim. One mistake and everything collapses. On December 5th, Monroe called with the date January 6th, full hearing. Both cases combined, property and fraud. "You'll get your home back and more." I hung up the phone and stared at the motel ceiling. My reflection in the TV screen looked older than I remembered. Lines deeper, eyes sharper. But behind the fatigue was something I hadn't seen since Ellen died. Resolve. That night, I took out my old suit from the closet, grey wool bought in 2008 for our anniversary dinner. I brushed off the dust and hung it near the door. Not as armor, as closure. Then I opened my ledger and wrote, Deck 5 court date set. House, Jan 6, $9 a.m. Next step, finish him with truth. I underlined the last line twice. The snow outside thickened, muting the world into silence. I whispered to the window, to the reflection of my old house down the block, "You called me garbage, son. Let's see what the law calls you." December 10th. Cleveland's wind cut like glass, the kind that whistles through cracks you thought were sealed. I woke before dawn, heart steady, mind sharp. In the motel mirror, I almost didn't recognize the man staring back, unshaven, eyes ringed with fatigue, but alive with purpose. Monroe had called the night before. "He's filed a countersuit," she'd said. "Claims you're mentally unfit. He's using your age as leverage." I didn't flinch. "Then let's show him what a competent old man looks like in court." Still, the accusation stung. Unfit. That word lingered like rust. I'd spent decades building machines that held up bridges, welding steel steady enough to bear the weight of trucks, and now my own son wanted to convince the world I couldn't manage a checkbook. At 9 a.m., I drove to Monroe's office. She handed me a thick envelope. "Discovery packet," she said. His attorney sent over exhibits, mostly emails and edited photos. Sloppy work. Inside one photo stopped me cold. It was me sitting on the porch 2 years ago, head in hands. Ellen had just died then. Ethan captioned it, "Dad's losing it again." He'd cropped out her hospital bracelet still sitting on my wrist. I felt something in me shift. The grief hardened into precision. "He shouldn't have touched her memory," I said quietly. Monroe nodded. "Then make sure he regrets it lawfully." That afternoon I visited Maria. She was decorating her porch for Christmas, stringing cheap tinsel around the railing. When I told her about the countersuit, she didn't hesitate. "Then you need witnesses who've seen the opposite," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'll get half this block to sign that you're fine, better than fine." By nightfall, she had 6 signed affidavits. Neighbors who'd seen me shovel their driveways, fix light posts, help carry groceries. Each statement printed, signed, dated. I placed them neatly behind a new tab in the binder labeled Competence Proof. 2 days later, December 12th, Monroe called again. "You're going to like this," she said. "We subpoenaed his financials. He's been paying property tax on your house out of the company account. Hall Fabrication, Inc. That's corporate misuse. Civil and criminal exposure." For a long time, I didn't say a word. Then I whispered, "Ellen would have called that poetic." The following Monday, I stopped by the courthouse to file one more motion, a request to add his illegal sublet earnings to the damages claim. The clerk looked up after stamping the papers and said, "You're building quite the case, Mr. Hall." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm just rebuilding what was stolen. When I got back to the motel, an envelope waited under the door, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Ethan's unmistakable pen. "You can't win. The judge will laugh you out of the room. Sell the house, take what's left, and disappear." Your old news. I folded it slowly, placed it under Exhibit F, Threats, and whispered, "That'll do nicely." The next evening, Monroe arranged a pre-hearing strategy meeting at her office. Mark Dwyer, my accountant friend, joined us with his laptop. "He moved $42,000 from your joint construction fund into his personal account 3 weeks before the lockout," Mark said. "I've got the trace." Monroe grinned. "That's theft and breach of fiduciary duty." "He's cooked." "Not yet," I said. "He still thinks I'm walking in blind." That night, I typed a message from a burner email Ethan didn't know I owned, the old company domain we used years ago. "See you in court, son. Hope you bring the right keys this time." No threats, no insults, just bait. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. His reply came fast. "I already changed the locks again. You'll never step foot in that house. Perfect." A written admission. I screenshotted it. Timestamp glowing at the bottom. Everything was set now. Every paper, every affidavit. Every digital footprint sealed and organized, like gears in a perfect machine. Outside, snow began again, thick and slow. I stood by the window, hands behind my back, watching flakes settle against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, I imagined the house breathing under its weight, patient, waiting. The storm was nearly ready to break. And this time, it wouldn't bury me. It would bury him. January 6th, the morning of the hearing. Cleveland woke under a pale sun and streets slick with ice, a kind of cold that bites through gloves and memory alike. I stood in front of the mirror at the motel, adjusting the tie I hadn't worn since Ellen's funeral. Grey wool suit, polished shoes, shoulders back. For the first time in months, I didn't see a man discarded. I saw a man rebuilt, By 8:15 a.m., the courthouse lobby hummed with low voices and the shuffle of boots on marble. I met Monroe by the metal detectors. She handed me a folder labeled Exhibit Index, Hall v. Hall. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since November 6th, I said. Courtroom 3B smelled of dust and cold air. Judge Whittaker presided, late 50s, glasses halfway down his nose, the kind of man who'd seen every version of family greed and still managed to look surprised. Ethan was already there, flanked by his attorney, slick-haired and smirking. Tina sat behind them, scrolling her phone. Ethan looked confident, rested, smug in the way only the untested can be. He didn't even glance at me when I walked in. When the bailiff called the case, the judge looked over the files. Hall versus Hall, elder abuse, property fraud, and corporate misuse. He sighed. "Father and son?" "Yes, Your Honor," Monroe said. "And quite a story. We started with ownership." Monroe rose, calm as winter steel. "Mr. Hall," she said, "did you at any point transfer ownership of your residence to your son?" I met her eyes. "No, ma'am. That deed's been in my name since 1993. She passed the stamped copy to the clerk. "Filed and recorded," she said. Ethan's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. My client refinanced the property." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor. There's no refinance on record." Next came the lockout. Monroe played the porch camera video on a small monitor facing the bench. The audio crackled, faint but clear, Ethan's voice cutting through the rain. "You're garbage. Get out before I call the cops." The courtroom went quiet, except for the hum of the heater. Whittaker leaned forward. "That's you, Mr. Hall, Jr.?" Ethan shifted. "It was taken out of context." "Context doesn't change volume," the judge said flatly. Monroe continued. "Your Honor, following this incident, Mr. Hall Sr. was denied access to his home and personal property. 2 days later, unauthorized withdrawals were made from his bank account totaling $11,400. Here are the statements." She slid the papers forward. Ethan's lawyer tried to interject again, but the judge's hand came down harder this time. "Counsel, your client's signature is on these transfers." Then Monroe smiled faintly. "There's more. The defendant listed his father's property on Airbnb under his own account." She turned the screen again. The listing still live, complete with renter reviews. One comment reads, "Nice place. Weird old man next door staring from his truck." That would be the plaintiff, Your Honor. Trying to check if his house was still standing. The courtroom chuckled softly. Even the judge exhaled through his nose. "Remarkable." Ethan's face turned the color of bad wine. "You can't prove Monroe interrupted him. "Actually, we can. We traced the Airbnb payments directly to your Hall Fabrication business account. The same account holding corporate funds from Hall & Sons LLC, of which your father is still the majority owner." That landed like a hammer. Ethan blinked, then looked at his attorney. "Wait, what?" Monroe's tone stayed clinical. "Your father never dissolved the LLC. You've been paying rent into an account he controls." The judge's eyebrows rose. "You've been your father's tenant this entire time?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence that followed was surgical. Then Monroe said quietly, "Your Honor, we request immediate restoration of property rights and financial restitution, as well as an eviction order for Mr. Hall Jr. from the LLC-owned condominium at 512 Euclid Avenue." The judge flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. "Well prepared, Ms. Monroe." He looked over the rim of his glasses at Ethan. "Son, you tried to evict the wrong man." The next part felt like watching gravity do its work. Every arrogant word, every signature Ethan forged, every post he'd made, it all came back to him like falling bricks. Tina shifted uncomfortably, whispering something sharp. Ethan hissed back. The judge's gavel cracked. "Enough. This is a courtroom, not a playground." Monroe handed me a single sheet. "Mr. Hall, would you please read the final paragraph?" I stood, voice steady. "I, Robert A. Hall, petition this court to reinstate ownership of my property and to recognize that justice, when delayed, is not denied." When I finished, the judge leaned back, eyes softening just a fraction. Mr. Hall, consider it granted. He signed both orders, restitution of property and eviction of tenant, 512 Euclid Ave. Effective immediately, he said. Sheriff's Department will enforce by noon tomorrow. For a second, everything went still. Then Ethan's chair screeched as he stood. You can't do this. I'm your son. The judge didn't look up. You should have remembered that before you changed the locks. Outside, reporters gathered. Small-town types hungry for a headline about family and downfall. A young woman shoved a microphone near me. Mr. Hall, how does it feel to win against your own son? I glanced at Monroe, then back at the cameras. Justice doesn't shout, I said quietly. It signs. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a soft click. The kind of sound that feels like a period at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Snow had started falling again, slow and clean. I stood there on the steps, watching it settle on the streetlights, and thought of Ellen. I hoped she'd seen what patience could do when it dressed itself in law instead of anger. As I walked to the truck, I passed Ethan standing by the curb, coat open, phone in hand, staring at nothing. I didn't say a word. He looked smaller now, not by height, but by truth. When I drove away, the courthouse faded in the mirror, and for the first time in months I didn't feel the weight of loss. I felt something better. Closure. By the next morning, January 7th, the sheriff's cruiser idled in front of Ethan's condo on Euclid Avenue. Snow blew sideways across the street, blurring everything into a grey haze. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I sat in my truck across the road, engine running low, heater humming, and watched the process unfold from a quiet distance. At 11:43 a.m., the deputy knocked. Ethan opened the door, still in the same jacket he'd worn to court. His face was pale, tired, the arrogance gone like smoke after rain. I saw him argue, gesture wildly, point toward the sky like the whole world owed him an apology. The deputy stayed calm, arms crossed, then handed him a folded sheet of paper, eviction order number 456732. The deputy spoke firmly, voice carrying even through the snow. You have 20 minutes, sir. Ethan froze. Then he stepped back inside. 10 minutes later, he came out with a duffel bag, 2 trash bags, and the same silver coffee machine I'd given him as a housewarming gift years ago. A fitting irony, something shiny, expensive, and hollow inside. I didn't wave, didn't move. I just watched as he walked down the icy steps and stopped at the curb. He looked around like a man waking from a bad dream, trying to find the edges of the nightmare and realizing it's his life. The deputy drove off. Ethan stood there for a long minute, then trudged away, snow soaking into his shoes. When he turned the corner, he disappeared into the white. By afternoon, Monroe called. The house is officially yours again. The deeds re-recorded. Accounts unfrozen. Her tone softened. Congratulations, Rob. You did this the right way. I said quietly, the only way. That evening I parked in front of my house for the first time in 2 months. The porch light flickered on, still motion-triggered, still remembering me. I walked up the steps and ran my fingers across the rail, feeling the familiar chips in the paint. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and still. Furniture had been moved, curtains changed. But the bones of the place, the smell of cedar, the faint hum of the old fridge, hadn't forgotten me. On the hallway wall hung the same photo of Ellen I'd last seen that night, face down on the counter. I lifted it gently, wiped the dust from the glass, and placed it back on the mantel where it belonged. We're home, I whispered. Maria came over an hour later with a casserole dish. You don't even have to heat it up, she said. Just eat. I smiled and told her she'd saved me again. The local paper ran a short column 2 days later. Father reclaims home after elder abuse case. Legal victory sets new precedent. No names. Just initials. That was fine. I didn't need recognition. I'd gotten something rarer, peace. By the end of that week, the snow melted from the gutters. The house settled into silence, warm and familiar. I spent the weekend fixing small things Ethan had broken. Hinges, a loose faucet, the old bird feeder Ellen loved. With each repair, it felt less like reclaiming a house and more like reclaiming myself. On Sunday night, I sat on the porch steps with a blanket around my shoulders. The neighborhood quiet except for a distant dog barking. The sky was clear again, black velvet pricked with stars. I thought about Ethan somewhere out there, maybe sitting in his car like I once did, wondering where he went wrong. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hate was heavy, and I'd already carried enough weight. Justice had been served. Now it was time to live again. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in the county clerk's office, the final set of papers in my hand. Case number 24, CV 7814, Hall v. Hall, closed. A neat, single stamp across the front read, "Resolved in favor of plaintiff." That word, resolved, carried a weight I hadn't expected. It didn't just mean the court had ruled. It meant that somehow the storm had passed. Ethan didn't appeal. He couldn't afford to. Between restitution, attorney's fees, and the IRS audit Monroe quietly triggered after uncovering his misused business funds, he was cornered. Word around town spread fast. His company accounts were frozen, suppliers cutting ties, reputation in freefall. One afternoon, I saw him by chance. Corner of Mayfield and 14th, outside a diner. He was thinner, unshaven, wearing the same jacket from court. He caught sight of me across the street. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then he gave a small nod. Not apology exactly, but something close. A silent acknowledgement that the balance had shifted back to where it should have been. I didn't cross over. I just nodded once, slow and steady, then kept walking. The next day, Monroe called again. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "Your son agreed to transfer his remaining company shares to you in exchange for debt forgiveness. It's official. You own Hall Fabrication outright again." I stared at the floorboards beneath me, the same ones I'd built with my own hands 25 years ago. "Feels like closing a circle," I said. She laughed softly. "A very expensive circle." That night I sat at my workbench in the garage, the smell of oil and iron still comforting. I opened the old ledger, the one Ellen and I used to track every contract, every paycheck. The handwriting had faded, but on the last page she'd once written something small and neat. "Family isn't who inherits your name. It's who honors it." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The truth of it hit harder than anything the judge had said. Outside, the wind carried a faint hum through the trees. The neighborhood had gone quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes when winter begins to loosen its grip. I poured myself a cup of coffee, no sugar, the way Ellen made it, and leaned back. Justice, I realized, doesn't roar. It doesn't demand applause. It simply restores balance, quietly, efficiently, like gravity doing its work. Ethan had learned that the hard way. I didn't hate him for it anymore. Maybe that was the final piece of the punishment, that I no longer had room for anger. When I stepped out onto the porch, the sky was a pale navy blue, stars just starting to push through. Across the street, Maria's porch light flickered on, and she waved from her window. I waved back, smiling for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I thought about everything that had happened. The night on the porch, the rain, the word garbage cutting through the dark. Funny how a single insult can start an avalanche that ends in redemption. In the end, he didn't destroy me. He defined me. Ellen once said grief and dignity are twins. They grow together or not at all. That night, sitting under the stars, I finally understood what she meant. He called me garbage, but I turned that garbage into gold, and that's when I realized something else. Revenge isn't about making someone lose. It's about making yourself whole again. By early February, Cleveland thawed into slush and gray skies, that dull in-between season when snow loses its shine, but spring hasn't found its courage yet. Inside the plant, the hum of welders and clatter of steel felt different now, steady, honest, almost content. I'd promoted Tom Nguyen to operations manager. Maria took over accounting. Every Friday, they'd stop by my office to update me, and every time I'd remind them, no heroics, just fairness. The words stuck. You could feel the morale return like oxygen in a room that had been sealed too long. One morning, Anita from HR came in holding a manila envelope. "This came for you," she said. The handwriting was familiar before I even opened it. Inside was a single page and a cashier's check for $2,000. The note read, "Dad, I found work in Columbus. Welding for once. Thought I should start paying back what I took." "Ethan?" I stared at that paper for a long time, thumb resting over his name. It wasn't about the money. 2,000 wouldn't scratch the surface of what he owed. But it meant he'd finally picked up a tool again. Maybe redemption starts small, one spark at a time. That night I drove out to the lakefront parked by the frozen edge and watched the wind tear thin lines across the ice. Ellen and I used to come here after shifts, sipping coffee from a thermos, dreaming about the company we'd build. I could almost hear her voice in the waves. "You did right by him, even if it hurt." A week later, I officially retired. I handed the keys of Hall Fabrication to Tom and Maria with a signed transfer clause that made the business employee-owned. "You built this place," I told them. "Now it's yours to keep honest," they cried. I didn't. I just felt light. Back home, the house was warmer than it had been in years. I fixed the porch rail, repainted the front door, and planted a new birch tree in the yard where Ellen's rosebush used to be. Every nail I hammered, every brush stroke I laid down, felt like sealing the past instead of escaping it. One evening, I got a voicemail. Ethan again. His voice was calmer this time, tired but sincere. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm working. I'm sober. I'm sorry I didn't call back right away. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a switch. It's a gate that opens when both sides are ready." A few days later, I wrote him a letter. "Proud of you for working again. Keep building. The rest will come." No sermon, no lecture. Just a truth he could hold on to. When I dropped it in the mailbox, I felt something click inside. Not triumph, not revenge. Peace as the evening settled. I brewed tea in Ellen's old blue mug and sat by the window. Outside, the new birch swayed under the streetlight, its shadow brushing the snow like forgiveness in motion. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the courtroom, the silence afterward, and realized that justice doesn't end with punishment. It ends when the noise in your head finally quiets down. That night, as the furnace hummed and the house exhaled, I whispered the line that had carried me through it all. "You didn't make me homeless, son. You just reminded me what home really means." Spring came early that year, the kind of spring that sneaks in without an announcement, melting the last crust of snow while you're not paying attention. I woke up one morning to the sound of birds at the window and sunlight cutting across the floorboards, the same way it used to when Ellen was alive. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in again. The kettle whistled, the clock ticked, and the walls, once silent with resentment, now hummed softly with peace. 3 months had passed since the court order. The company was thriving under Tom and Maria's leadership. They sent me monthly reports even though I'd told them not to bother. "Old habits die hard," Maria said in her last email. She'd attached a photo of the new employee break room they built. Bright, clean, laughter caught mid-air in the shot. It looked nothing like the place Ethan once ran, with fear and arrogance. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to drive out to Columbus. No warning, no agenda, just a quiet pull I couldn't ignore. The GPS led me to a modest industrial block, Columbus Metalworks, painted in white letters above the door. Outside stood Ethan, wearing a welding helmet pushed up on his forehead, his face streaked with soot but calmer than I'd ever seen it. He didn't notice me at first. He was teaching a younger kid how to set a weld seam, explaining something with his hands the way I once taught him. For a moment, I just watched. Same posture, same focus, same rhythm of work that had once built our name. When he finally turned and saw me, he froze, helmet half raised, eyes wide. I gave a small nod. He hesitated, then nodded back. No words, none needed, just recognition. He walked over slowly, wiping his gloves on his jeans. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I was in the neighborhood," I replied. He smiled and small, unsure. "I heard about the employee buyout. That's good." You always said the people made the place. They still do, I said. And they're proud again. We stood there for a moment, both of us breathing the same air but in different chapters of life. He looked down, then back at me. I'm trying, Dad, one job at a time. I know, I said quietly. You're doing it the right way now, he nodded. I still think about Mum, what she'd say. I looked toward the open workshop door, sunlight spilling over the steel beams. She'd say it took us long enough to learn. He laughed softly. A real one this time. No bitterness, no pride. Just the sound of something human returning after being gone too long. When I drove home that evening, the air smelled like wet soil and new beginnings. The factory lights of Cleveland glowed in the distance as I pulled into the driveway. The porch light flicked on, welcoming me like an old friend. Inside, Ellen's blue mug waited by the sink. I poured a little tea, then sat by the window as the last light faded. Across the street, the birch tree I'd planted months ago swayed gently, its leaves whispering in the evening breeze. I thought about that night, the one when Ethan called me garbage and left me outside in the cold. The irony was almost poetic. He'd called me worthless, but in losing me, he'd found his worth. As the stars blinked awake, I whispered to the quiet, "You were right. Sometimes the law doesn't just punish, it heals." Then I smiled, leaned back and let the silence take over. Not empty, not heavy, just still. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was watching both of us finally stand,